Let's begin. We'll have Q&A at the end, but I'm going to cover a lot of content, everything testing, and hopefully it'll be useful and informative and really give you good information for the year and beyond. All right, let's dive in. So the landscape that we're in, as everyone knows, we're predominantly in a test optional world. The over 2,000 schools in the country are test optional, but testing still has quite a meaningful impact on the college admissions process, and it seems to be only growing as more schools are going back test required and more kids are choosing to send their test scores. So things are really shifting. The two tests out there, the SAT is taking up about 2/3 of the market, and roughly 2/3 of our kids are taking the SAT, and about 1/3 are taking the ACT. They're both good tests, and in different conditions, we advocate kids go one or the other way based on their baseline testing score. So both are good tests. Colleges are happy with either one, but right now the SAT has really recovered from the pandemic, while the ACT really hasn't found its footing just yet. But it has made a shorter test, which should be popular in that it should gain traction and share over the next year or so. All right, many of you have seen the news over the past three years. Starting in 2022, schools began going back to testing. And now it's every year we're seeing about 6 new colleges go back test required. And there are more coming. And you have these very selective top schools in the country, the Harvards and the Browns and the Caltechs and MIT and Stanford. And you have the state flagships. And the South is simply filling in. And we're going to see the map keep filling in as more schools in the South go back required. The entire system in Tennessee and in Florida, we have the top 7 schools in Georgia. In the last 6 months, we've seen Auburn, Alabama, LSU. They're just flooding back. And so this will continue. I'm waiting for UNC Chapel Hill. I'm waiting for Virginia as the more of the public Ivies revert back. And even Maryland, College Park is considering going back test required. So we'll expect these decisions in the next year or two, and as they end their experiments post-COVID. And here's the map. Here's the timeline. Georgia, where I live, was one of the first states to go back to testing back in 2021. Then Georgetown, MIT, Tennessee, Purdue. And last year, it was a big year when you had Miami jumped off, then UPenn, Ohio State, Carnegie Mellon, Auburn, Princeton, Alabama. This year so far, we have LSU and Claremont McKenna. I'm waiting for Harvey Mudd to jump in with the McKenna schools out in California. And then some of the other state flagships, I'm just waiting for UNC. When your out-of-state acceptance rate is 7%, you're getting a lot of kids with a lot of great grades. And, testing becomes more meaningful, more important when you have this huge pool of students applying who all look very similar. Testing can be a very meaningful differentiator in the process. One of the key indicators to help you get a sense of what admissions offices are thinking about testing is the percent of students who are enrolled who have test scores. Princeton and Penn were both in the 70 percentile before they went test required. And again, looking at UNC, about 70% of kids who are there have test scores. UVA, Chicago probably won't, but they do their own thing. And then Emory could go back test required at any moment. So things like that. So part of it is you have your list of schools that are test optional, but know that things will change. There are going to be more schools coming in test required over the next year. And part of it is, it's important you have a test score if you're looking at schools that are highly selective. And you probably already are, because so many of the schools to which kids cross-apply are required. So if you're looking at Emory, if you're looking at UVA, you might be looking also at Texas or Florida or Georgia or other schools like that. So you probably already do have a test score in mind, unless you have a list that's totally devoid of testing. If some kids in California, because the UCs are all test blind, test scores don't matter. But it means then you can't apply to Stanford or Caltech or Claremont McKenna. So it will be a limiting factor, which is why more and more kids are getting testing because of these changes. The rationale is very clear. It's just the data. It's just the research. When they ran the regression, they ran the stats. It turns out that with all this grade inflation, test scores are becoming a stronger and better predictor of performance in these elite schools. So trying to figure out who does well freshman year, does well over 4 years, test scores are a predictor, and they're independent of grades. And this graphic here tells a lot of the story. For the Opportunity Insights group out of Harvard, Raj Shetty, the phenomenal economist, analyzed the research patterns, the patterns of application and acceptance and admission at the Ivies plus the Big Four. schools that include Stanford, Duke, Chicago, and MIT. And for schools that selective, as testing goes up in lockstep, college GPA goes up. Kids with the 1200 had a 3.2 at these schools on average. Kids with a perfect score had a 3.68. So that's a meaningful increase. However, when it comes to high school GPA, things didn't move nearly as much. Kids who had a 3.1 in high school, their GPAs in college were about a 3.45, 3.46. And then those with a 4.0 in high school had about a 3.58. So it was a much weaker correlation at these top schools, and testing was a better predictor of performance. That's why the Ivies, 7 of the Ivies are back, as is Stanford, as is MIT. It's because of this research, very clear. UT Austin jumped back in the fray, and their thing was looking at the analysis. Kids without test scores were much more likely to be on probation, having below 2.0 after freshman year, and also after freshman year, kids who sent test scores had a GPA that was 0.86 points higher, which is incredible. That's like kids having a 3.5 on average versus kids having a 2.64, which is a very big difference. So the test submitters were doing a lot better at UT, and that's why they said we are going back required. This experiment essentially failed. John Ladding here at Emory, he made the comment that we simply do not trust GPA like we used to because grades are inflated and not as good of a predictor as they used to be. So we're looking at external assessments, that's AP exams, that's SATs more closely because, the nature of grade inflation and so forth. So we have these test scores, and even in schools where they're optional, they are influential, they are impactful, they move the needle. So strong test scores can improve the strength of an application. They demonstrate that you're ready for high-level work, and they're meaningful, especially for STEM kids. If you want to be an engineer, that math score matters a lot. Or a computer science major or an AI major, they want to see math skills. And also there are schools where like Alabama, where there's merit-based aid, which is directly tied to testing. And so my niece was in this category. She had a 1390 on the SAT. And so she was from Richmond, Virginia, Midlothian. And tuition for her would have been $34,000. But instead, she, with her 3.5 GPA, which everybody has, and a 1390, her tuition dropped every year from 34,000 to about 10,000. So tuition became much more meaningful. That was a net savings of $96,000 over the course of 4 years. That's a big deal. So merit money is real, and testing can impact merit money. All right. So the question is, should I still prioritize testing? Is it meaningful? Well, it depends, but ultimately there are many things that are meaningful that are optional, but are still highly impactful. And here is an example. When the pandemic was new, and all of these colleges were forced to go test optional, because if you remember, back in March and April and May and June, we had one SAT, ACT after another canceled, and kids just couldn't get testing because we were in the middle of COVID. So all these schools were forced to go optional for that class, and then many of them stayed there. But for the first year or two, this was also new to them, they began to publish the admit rates with and without test scores, and you see, holy cow, there are some very big differences. Yale was admitting kids without tests at 2% and kids with tests at 6%. That's a 3x increase. Boston College, their admit rate without tests was 11%, with tests about 30%. Colgate was double, Notre Dame was double, Emory was double, the UVA was about double. So we're seeing, but then look at Vandy. Vandy didn't give that same kind of pop. They weren't looking with test scores with the same kind of weighting as a factor in admission. So there are definitely philosophies in the admissions offices which will impact the weight of a test score, but they don't publish this. This was a moment in time, and all these schools now are more selective than this. So this is kind of a snapshot in time. But this is all to say that for the moment they were very transparent, which they're not anymore. Now it's back to being a black box. They were showing you that kids with test scores were getting in at a higher rate. So that's informed some of the background, which again, if you ask me what's the current one at Wellesley, I have no idea, or Barnard or Tufts. They aren't giving this information out anymore. Some schools are giving a signal with their language. Grinnell says, hey, if you have a score, it may help you. If you don't have a score, we have less information. Boston College, they were saying they were agnostic, but again, they were admitting kids almost 3-1. So they said, finally, students who have test scores, they are encouraged. So when you say the word, it may help you, or the word encouraged or recommended, that means there is going to be a difference in the likelihood of you getting in or not getting in based on having a test score or no test score. So that's the look for encourage, look for help, look for recommended. Those are meaningful words. Tufts is a school that's very transparent. We encourage you with a certain score threshold. If you have a 1300 or higher, 28, please send it. So even though their middle 50 percentile is markedly higher, it's in the high 14s, they're telling us that, hey, even though the kids who are sending test scores are up here, if you have a 1300 or higher, please send it. Some admissions officers are transparent, but it's not posted on their website or on their blogs. Like I've heard from several people, I've done some triangulation, people who are former admissions officers at Vanderbilt, that if you don't have a 33, don't send it. Their middle 50 percentile is a 34 to a 35. And I have students who've worked their tail off, got a 33, and I've heard from multiple admissions officers and former Vandy officers saying that 33 isn't helpful for us. It affects marketing and other things, only a 34. My niece, when she had a 1390, talked to the rep at Tulane. Tulane said, if you don't have a 1420, don't send it. It'll hurt you. And so she kept that score to herself and she got into Tulane. So part of it is if they're that transparent, it's amazing. Often they aren't. But you could look to that middle 50 percentile for enrolled students to give you a sense of the kids who they're accepting with what test scores as a threshold. But I love it when schools are just very open and honest, but often they aren't. Auburn, for a minute, they were telling you if it was conditional test optional. With a 3.6, tests were optional. Below a 3.5, tests were required. Then they pivoted and said, you know what? We're going to go test optional for this current year, but less than 5% of the applicant pool will be considered without testing, which is almost nothing. So Auburn, and then next year, they're going back test required. So that's not fall of this year, but fall of next year. So there's still a pathway at Auburn, but man, it's narrow. They are telling you test scores matter, and we're seeing more and more of the state flagships doing this kind of thinking. So more kids who have a test score are sending it, but with strategy. One of my good friends, his daughter just got a 33 on the ACT after a lot of work, and I was very, very happy, impressed. But I've learned that 33 is not going to Vandy. It is going to Tulane. It is going to Georgia. It is going to, we're looking at, does it go to WashU? Question mark. I think it's still in the range for WashU, but Vandy, it's not going to go. So it's interesting that, that strategy, my niece she had a 1390. It went to Georgia. She got into Georgia. It went to Alabama, got into Bama. It went to South Carolina, got to South Carolina. It didn't go to UVA. It didn't go to Tulane. She got into Tulane, didn't get to UVA. She ended up getting money going to South Carolina, and she just graduated, I think it was 2 weeks ago from Columbia. So very exciting. But again, using that strong test score and strong grades, that was parlayed into merit-based aid. Some need, some merit, some hybrid, but testing can be impactful in that regard. Here's a slide of the common application that for the first time since the pandemic, more kids are back sending test scores than are not. And we're seeing the decline in kids who aren't sending test scores. That number is dropping, and the number that's rising is score submission. And that's because when schools like Texas, I just learned this, actually, I was at a conference in Baltimore yesterday, and one of the reps from Trinity College in Texas, they said that, hey, our score submission was at 40%, that 4/10 of our kids sent test scores. After UT Austin went test required, their score submission numbers jumped to 60%. And that's just to say there's going to be a spillover effect because kids who are cross-applying to UT and Trinity, that's a lot of kids because UT Austin is the flagship school. Trinity is more expensive and also a good school, not the same reputational strength as UT Austin. But if they already worked their tail off to get a strong test score for UT, they'll also send the same score to Trinity. Whereas before, they might not have when UT was optional. So every school that goes test required, there's going to impact their whole base of admissions, LSU, Ohio State, these big state schools, but also it'll trickle over and it'll influence into schools around them where kids cross-apply. Because now they have the score they work for, they're going to send it. So this number is going to only increase, and the number of apps without test scores is going to keep declining, and I think at a steeper rate. It's going to change the kind of an inflection point after this. All right, testing matters more for a certain kind of kids. If you're an engineer, math. They got to stay at math. Because before you can do differential equations and calculus advanced linear, they want to see, can you do algebra 1, algebra 2? That's the SAT. And if you can't do algebra 1, algebra 2, you're going to probably have a hard time in Calc 4 and really advanced mathematics. They want to see, do you have the basic math fluency and skills, which are revealed on these tests. It's mostly 8th, 9th, 10th grade math. If you're a business major, that's finance. You have to price derivatives. Derivatives, that's calculus. So they want to see a good math score. STEM kids in general, computer science, those kind of things, they want to see, a good score there. So it's the math that matters for STEM kids much more. And there are, kids who have an A in calculus is one thing, but getting a standardized 5 on AP Calc or BC Calc, that's meaningful. Getting a 780 on your math, that's meaningful. Okay, and that's where schools like MIT said, hey, we found with our research that the kids who, scoring below 700 something were the ones failing out. Like, we need kids who rock and roll with math, which is why MIT went back test required back like 5 years ago. Engineering programs, I wrote an article about a year ago, that if you're an engineer, don't count on your school being test optional. We're seeing more and more schools who are the top engineering schools in the country are going back test required, or even some schools are only going back for their engineers. MIT, Stanford, Purdue, Tech, Carnegie Mellon, all these schools now are test required, and almost all of them were optional, or even Caltech was test blind. Cooper Union for engineers, required. Naval Academy, it's required. A third of them are engineers. Worcester Poly, they were test blind for a couple of years, and now they're back to optional because they understand there's value in testing. So at the schools that are big selective schools and the very tough flagship schools, testing matters more, and then schools who are less selective. If you're applying to a school that accepts 8/10 of the applicants, testing is less meaningful unless they have a required that isn't going to be a thing in the future. But let's dive into the assessments. We have 2 tests. We have the SAT and the ACT, and they're both good tests. They're both shorter now, a lot shorter. The ACT lopped off science and made it optional, a separate score, not part of your composite score. And now English, math, and reading together, it's 2 hours and 5 minutes. And the SAT, with their 2 verbal and 2 math modules, is 2 hours and 14 minutes. A lot shorter than they were a few years ago. There was a point in time when the SAT was a 5-hour experience. It was 8-1 with the essay at the end and the 10 sections, not anymore. They're going to reconcord them next year, but currently there's a concordance table that's a little bit old, a little bit dated before they made the changes, but that's the one that colleges are using, and that's the one you can use. If you're curious how a 1200 lines up with the ACT, type in ST concordance table, it'll pop right up. All right, the digital SAT is an adaptive test, whereas the ACT is simply a linear test. So adaptive means I take a baseline module in verbal. If I get more than 2/3 right, I'm going to go to a harder module. If I get less than 2/3 right, I'm going to an easier module. Same thing for math. So everyone gets a baseline that's pretty similar, and then if I do well, I go hard. If I do less well, I go to an easier module. The ACT is non-adaptive. It's a linear test. That's it. And science is optional. So a science optional, you can opt in or opt out. It's going to be a separate standalone score, but a third of our kids aren't even doing anything with it at all. But we recommend everyone takes it one time in case a school on your list goes test required, but there really aren't that many schools that are required. The ACT, it's a faster test. It's a speedier test. You have to move more quickly. You have 40% more time on the SAT for math and mid-30s for verbal. So you have to move faster on the ACT. That's it. The ACT also has more items because when you go test adaptive, you can trim the number of questions you have to ask kids because the advanced kids are not getting all the easy questions and the lower level kids aren't getting all the really hard questions. That makes it more efficient. But the ACT, I have to ask you enough English questions to populate a table for the lower scoring kids and the higher scoring kids. So there are some experimental questions which don't count. 8 of them. There are 2 per section on the SAT, but you never know which ones they are. And on the ACT, there are going to be 29 questions. And there are some like big, like in English, it's all big blocks. It's not, the SAT changed their format. So it's simply a little paragraph, a question, next topic. On the ACT, it's long form. I'm going to have a big old block of text and then 10 questions. So the entire thing, that entire vignette and questions are all experimental, which means one of the 4 reading vignettes is experimental, one of the 6 science sections, science vignettes, and one of the 5 English that they're experimental. So as a big block of questions, don't count. It's part of it. There are 2 options, whereas the SAT is digital only, full stop. The ACT, I can choose paper or digital. Sometimes if they offer it during the school day, you're forced into one thing or the other. But if you have the choice right now, we advocate at Applerouth, take the paper. The paper is better. The ACT is really a paper test, which they're forcing into a digital mode, versus the SAT, they totally redid the test to fit a digital format. So you can finally bring your own device. That was not available for over a year. But we don't love TestNav, their interface. We love the Blue Book on the College Board. They spent time and money working on the user interface, user experience. They didn't do the same investment over at ACT with TestNav and Pearson's. One of the things that's really lame is you do highlights on a question of 10, and then your highlights disappear when you go to the next question. That's bad design. It's a mistake. It's also more challenging doing long form reading on the screen. There are questions where it says like a main point of the highlighted paragraph, and you have to go and scan up and down and find the paragraph, which is just bad. It should jump you there immediately. That's bad design. College Board, it's elegant, it's short, a few lines, a question, next thing, new topic. Very simple, it works. The ACT now has Desmos, a calculator that we also have on the SAT. So that is it's a positive thing. We know that because it's so speedy on the ACT, a lot of kids don't finish, but more kids are finishing now with this current redesign. If you look at the test in blue, that's the old format. That's called the legacy test. And the format in orange is the new enhanced test. And you're seeing that English, about 2 in 10 kids don't finish. They have a hard time finishing. Math, about 6 in 10 kids finish with time. The other kids are kind of rushing. But reading, they made reading more spacious, and now more kids are finishing, almost 3/4. And the same thing, science. About half the kids are finishing science. Now it's almost 3/4. So the new form is more generous, but still, this is a speedier test. So know that. That's how to frame the ACT. Now, the ACT science is not really a science test. Of 40 items, about 9, 10 of them require some basic minimal outside knowledge, but it's nothing like AP Chem or biophysics. And it's mostly reading and math and some charts and tables. So it's not a good predictor of how you'll do in an engineering program or a science program, which is, and if you look at this, the science section correlates very highly with the reading and the math. So look at the bottom on the left side, highest composite score, the kids who enrolled in college. If you look at the English, math, and reading by itself, the average is 22.7. If I factor in the science, the delta is only 0.1 point. It's negligible. The science correlates so highly that for most kids out there, the science is not going to really deviate from their other three, which is why it's easy to lop it off. And they also ran correlations at the ACT between the 4 sections and performance in college, freshman year GPA. And the weakest predictor of GPA was the science section, which is why so many colleges now are just like, doesn't really matter, onward and upward, it's not that meaningful. Science is optional. There are a few schools out there. Duke and Michigan recommend it. Hopkins says that it can add value. Boston, Georgetown, Pomona require science. But again, there are like 10 schools in the country that really, really want science, and the rest of them really don't. They're making it optional. It does not affect at all your ACT score. It's separate. So even though here it looks like it's part of the composite, it's not. This kid got a 34, 32 of math in December, got a 36 in English and then in reading. But that 30 science is not factored into that composite. It's a separate standalone score. And most folks are, if they look at it or not, it's an optional add-on. Vandy's interesting. They have a do no harm policy. If you have it, we're going to use it. If it helps you, we'll super score it. If not, we're not going to. So there is some nuance here with a small number of schools, but ultimately I see fewer and fewer kids taking science. Like BU had a thing that if you send a score, we want the science, but now they're backtracking on that, and they might even change course entirely. And so as you have only a handful of schools if they care about this, fewer kids take it, and eventually it goes away. I don't know if it's in a few years, but science is becoming less of a thing. If you want to show off your skills, you're ready for STEM, crush that math score, honestly. The overlap on these two tests is about 80%. They share a lot of reading and English and verbal skills and some math skills. There are some differences. The SAT has more rigorous reading, and the math is more multi-step, like 3 or 4 steps, more challenging, though it's much narrower in scope. You have fewer, it's algebra 2, but more deep with some more challenging problems. And then you have the ACT, speedy, fast, and has longer reading and more a broader range of math concepts. We have this monster book for the ACT. It's like 1,200 pages, but 400 plus pages are the math section because there are so many math concepts. They don't appear on every test, but if I'm going for a 35 or 36, I have to know these things which appear every 3 or 4 tests. So it's a very, very broad array of content which might appear on the ACT math, much, much narrower on the SAT. And so the name of the game is take a baseline test, find out where you're better, and go with that. SAT, they have more time, but they have more complex multi-step problems, more advanced reading, more evidence, more causation. So you've had good math skills, especially in algebra, because 7/10 of the math is algebra and half the test is math. Compared to the ACT, it's a third math, and it's about 40% algebra. So just, algebra matters a lot more on the SAT. ACT, it's fast. You got to move quick, and you have to, there's a much broader range. You have to memorize certain terms, certain concepts from various parts of trig, those kind of things, matrix multiplication, determinants. And some kids prefer paper. Well, you have an option still with the ACT. All right. The content here, I mentioned about 70% of the content is algebra. There's more geometry and trig on the ACT, and there's more data analysis, more stats also on the ACT. All right, some key details. ST Math, 2 modules. You can always use your calculator. You have scratch paper. Now the modules, the left side gives you an example of a baseline module. It's the baseline, has mostly middle-level questions, a few easy, a few hard. If I don't do as well, I'm going to an easy module, which is the one in green, where I'm stacking up the easy questions, and I have fewer of the hard questions. If I do better than 2/3, I'm going to the right side, where they're really reducing the number of easy questions, and they're stacking the level 3s and 4s. And so that's how it differs, which means if I go to the hard module, I have to adjust my pacing because ultimately I've got to move faster because I'm going to have much, on average, harder questions. The score possibility on the easier section, I'm capped around 640 or so. I can't get any higher than that because I've already missed too many. Even if I crush every item, I've already missed too many on the first section. I'm capped 650. That's pretty much where I'm going. Whereas on the hard module, I could go all the way up to the top. My lowest I'm going to get is a 440 because I've already anchored in points from the first section. If I miss every question, I'm still going to stay at 440. But I have the possibility of hitting the high scores with that. Okay. Now, one thing about the SAT, it's interesting. The scoring, they use something called item response theory, where different items have different weighting. This is new. For about 95 years, the SAT, every item counted the same. 1 raw point becomes 1 scale point. The hardest question and the easy question counted the same. Not anymore. That's also a way they can become more efficient because they count certain foundational questions more. And so rather than asking you 3 questions, I'm going to ask you 1 question, but if you miss it, if you get it right, it's going to factor in a greater extent. So, but we know that careless errors are not your friend on the SAT. Look at this on the blue book. If I missed a question number 25 in module 2, it's a hard question. I'm going to get a score of 780. So I missed 1 on verbal. It was a hard question, and so I dropped 20 points. But however, if I missed 23, an easier question, I drop 50 points because that's an easy question. The assumption is if you can't do this easy question, there are several concepts behind that you don't understand. So you got to not rush yourself. If you have more time, just don't plow through and be in a hurry. Now, Desmos is a calculator. I'm going to go through a few. I'm not going to make you do the math. Just giving you an example of this. They have, this more advanced equations of a line, some equations. They're asking what's the value of x. I could do all this. I could substitute. I could do elimination method, more advanced math, or I could just plug it into Desmos. Half x plus third y equals 8. Fifth x minus ninth y equals 1. Boom, the x value is 10. I just saved myself 80 seconds. And then you can solve about half the tests like that. So Desmos is your best friend. And some schools, some kids know Desmos from physics or from chemistry. And it's a very powerhouse graphing calculator. We would recommend everyone also still bring their TI because while Desmos is amazing at graphing, there are certain things where it's a little faster to use your TI and type things in, trying to find the median or the mean or things like that. All right, now Desmos, use it, practice it, and so forth. Develop your algebra skills for the SAT. They're going to ask you a lot about linear functions and graphing are the heart and soul of the SAT math section, looking at lines and negative pieces. Verbal, it's like TikTok, tiny paragraph, 100 words, 120 words, boom, one question, next. ACT is very different. Now the SAT, they compressed into one section. Notice the ACT has a separate English, grammar, and reading. That was the case for years on the SAT till they smashed them together into verbal, evidence-based, English and evidence-based reading and writing, but they really shrunk writing. Writing is a smaller portion. It's mostly reading. And so the grammar has taken a back seat. The first, and this is always the structure of your 27 questions. I mean, it always goes like this, where craft and structure, words of context, then you go to evidence, inference, the foundation of reading comprehension. Then we go to grammar, sense, structure, conventions of English. Then we shift to more reading, transition, synthesis. So this is, and it always goes easy to hard in each one of these sections. Kind of give you an example. Here's a quick little paragraph. They're asking some details, and then they ask the question, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word? And there are some vocab words, but the SAT is nothing like the one we took as kids. I took this in 1993, and I learned 3,000 vocab words. No more of that, no more flashcards. Although there are a couple questions which have advanced vocabulary, it's a fraction compared to what it was back when they were sentence completions, analogies, antonyms. It's not worth it putting the time in this new world. Also, there are logic-based errors and questions. Now, the one thing I didn't love with the SAT when it made the change, when they went to item response theory and different things at different weights, they got rid of the test return with the good feedback. And they give you these heat maps, which are almost worthless to us. So they don't tell you what question you missed. They don't tell you how many questions you missed. They don't tell you if you went to the easy or hard section. They give you this heat map, which is like, okay, so I guess I need to work a little bit on trig, but that's it. I don't know what section. It's not really great. We have 4 practice tests working on our 5th, which gives deep analysis, looks more like this, like the old school thing. Here's what you missed. Here was the level of difficulty. Here, then it's very detailed. Same thing with the math. You missed this percentage, just exponents and roots. You need help with this, and then we go through how many easy, how many hard, level 3 questions. So it's much more robust. When you're prepping for the SAT, there are 8 calibrated practice tests, 4 through 11. The first 3 they kind of killed. Learn Desmos and learn how to use graphing to solve algebra questions. That'll really save you time. On the ACT, again, you have to learn all these concepts: asymptotes, matrices, conic sections, ellipses. There's a lot more advanced content. Although, like, matrices may appear every other test, but still, if you're going, it's part of the the canon of the ACT. It's included. It's there. And then some examples here. When you have the digital ACT, you have tools, highlighters and things and so forth. And you have to have constant Wi-Fi, which is one kind of drawback. And then, you have to move quickly on the ACT. You have to, be able to graph the slope, 2/3, rise over run, which are the points. Boom, boom. Here is an example of the reading they give you. So you have 4 lines. You have 9 questions and so forth. You got to read it all and so forth. And then common error types, kind of giving you some examples of this. Also, I mentioned you have to know more concepts, which the following is equivalent to the determinant. That's a math vocab word. The determinant is when you multiply A times D to B times C. So if kids don't know that, they're not going to get it right. And they don't give you definitions. This is in your mind for the ACT. So it's a little bit different. All right, so in terms of which test to try first, get a dual baseline. Everyone should take a practice SAT and a practice ACT. Out of the gate, unprepped, unprimed, go and take them, see where you're better. And now, ultimately, if you have an advantage on one or the other, that's more than 70 points on the SAT scale, go with that. So, because there's a margin of error, the standard error of measurement is 30 points on each test, okay? So if I get a 1200 on the SAT, there's 30 points of error. On a given day, I could swing to a 1230 or 1170. That's my margin of error. And the same thing on the ACT. There's like 30 points. There's roughly 1 point of error, and now it's maybe 1.2 on the new test. But if I get a 26, I could have gotten a 27.3. I could have gotten, a 24.7. There's a little bit of a range. And so with that, but beyond 60 points, I'm beyond the margin of error. So if I get a 26 on the ACT and a 1290 on the SAT, I could take it 5 times in a row, and I will keep doing better every time on that higher scoring SAT. So that's where, but within that margin, if I get a 26 ACT and a 1220, that could be a swing of a question. Ask the student which one felt better for you. Do you have any preference? Do you like the way they present math in a different way? But again, beyond 60 points, go with a higher score. All right, testing plans are very simple these days. We have a lot more options. We advocate everyone plan on 3 official tests. We love one and done. We shoot for that. We love 2 and done. But many, many, many of our kids keep getting improvements to the 3rd test. And there's something called super scoring, where they cherry pick your best math and your best verbal or your best sections, and they make the composite using super scoring, which is why you take it more than once. There's also random variation. You might hit a passage that stumps you on the ACT one time, then the next time you take it, it's one you actually studied in school, you blow it away. So because of the personal level of difficulty and the variance, we recommend very strongly taking it several times. You now have SATs August and September, which are both before early deadlines, then October, November, December before regular deadlines. And the ACT, you have coming up the June ACT, in July, and September, October. So you have 7 per year for the ACT, and now you have 8 per year for the SAT. A lot of options. There used to be no summer tests when I started this thing, and then now they've added so many. So that's really helped. There are different ways to do it. Some kids, a lot of their kids prep after they finish sophomore year. The real high flyers who are going to have crazy schedules and activities during the school year as juniors, often they'll do a class over the summer, do some prep, totally fine. And you could even go do some prep, lock in a test, in August, and then come back to it later in the spring, totally fine. Once you lock in some of your gains, other people wait until later in the year. We have kids who wait till they're wrapping up their junior year, and then they go banging out the June SAT, August, and September. We don't advocate strongly if you're doing heavy APs, knocking out like 3 or 4 APs and then going and taking the SAT. That's hard because trying to do both things at once. But there are different structures that work for kids. Things that help predict performance on testing. Practice test work between 10 and 17 points per practice test. That's what I found in my research. Khan Academy, also College Board. They're very helpful. When you take the test and then practice and then go over what you missed. When you spread things out, it's better than cramming. I always prefer 8-10 weeks versus a 2-week cram session. Kids who start early, they do better. Kids who put in more time on task, they do better. Kids who have momentum towards that last test, who review, do some practice before the final thing, they do better. Having a goal, it helps with motivation, helps keep you on track as you're making progress with your practice and test towards that goal. Super scoring, I mentioned, they'll take your best verbal and math from different test dates and smash it together, and that's your super score. Many, many schools do that. You can look it up on College Board's Big Futures. They'll tell you if they super score or on their websites. The ACT super scores automatically once you have 2 tests. It's generated automatically. And science is not included in the super score, except for like a couple schools in the country that they're weird. And I can't stand doing this for long, but it's a separate standalone section. Should I send in my test scores? Well, first, get your baseline scores, look at the schools, look at the range. And there are students we work with who have amazing rigor, 9 advanced classes, dual enrollment, APs, IBs. They have a 3.9, 2 unweighted. Their testing is not eating, they have an 1150 on the SAT. And the schools they're looking at want 1500s or 1450s. And it's going to be such a lift. My thing is, can you build a good list without having to worry about it versus us trying to get you 300 points? Unless you're looking at a school where there's going to be monstrous scholarship money, or I can get in-state, I can get tuition discounted tremendously. Then it's like, you know what? Maybe it's worth going for it, but it's a big lift. Because some kids, are just really strong testers. Other kids have to work more at it. And but if I do look at that delta between their GPA and their course rigor and their testing, and sometimes it's like unless they're hard to set at MIT, then you got to go for it, or Stanford, or one of the schools, or Duke, not Duke, but one of the test required schools. All right, Rick Clark is a buddy over at Georgia Tech. He said, if you're in that middle 50, send your scores. If you're in the bottom quartile, I wouldn't send it. And that's what we learned. I've learned from, the admissions reps. 33, love it. It's a great score, but not for the hyper selective, not for Vandy. Vandy's taking, regular decisions, 2.6% of kids early. It's like 11.4. It's crazy. But Vandy wants a 34. So, all right, at 33, I'm not going to send it. And that actually is in the bottom quartile because their middle 50 is a 34 to 35. Although it's, not everyone sends test scores, they're optional. So as an example, for the Buffs over in Boulder, great school, great location. Their middle 50, half the kids who are enrolled at Boulder have a score between 1180 and 1390, which means a quarter have a 1400 and above, and a quarter have a sub 1180, 1170 below. Do I send my 1300 and above? You bet I do. Every time, all day long, no questions asked. Do I send my 1170? Only if it's something very special. You're from a part of the region of the country where Colorado has very little draw from. You're from an underrepresented school where, you got 1150, but it's the best score in your high school. That your first generation is something special about it. If you're an average kid, unhooked kid, 1150, I wouldn't send it. If you're a straight academic kid with no hooks, it's a little bit gray, slightly gray in that third quartile. If I have a 1290, I'm just under the midpoint, I'll probably send it. If I have an 1180, I'll probably keep it. I'll probably withhold it. But also depends. Let's say I have a 1250. So I'm in that third quartile. But I have a 700 on math and a 550 on verbal, but I'm applying to a STEM program. Then you know what? I want them to see my 700. So I'll send it even though it's a little bit lower. Versus I have a 3.9 unweighted, all the rigor in the world, and I have a 1200. I probably want them to consider my application exclusively looking at my grades and my rigor and my activities and everything else. Because my 1200 is a relative weakness compared to the other pieces. So it's looking at the context of the application and look at where testing strengthens as an asset or weakens. So these are factors to consider. And your college advisors and your school will help you with that discussion. I think that is my deck. And I want to open this up. We have question time. So please, let's, in the Q&A window, let us do some questions and answers. And, okay. And there may be a poll at the end. Sometimes we ask a poll of, hey, do you want any, they're May 4th and May 6th. I think that's the wrong poll. But there may be a different poll in terms of, do you want someone to reach out to you with any questions? All right, so I have one question in the Q&A. There we go. That is the appropriate follow-up poll. But we do a number of things at Applerouth. We do test preparation, academic work, coaching for executive functioning, those kind of things. Do you want any help with any of these things? If so, please reach out to me. Okay, so that's a quick thing if you want any help. All right, here we go. Do you think that schools that are very selective, such as Tufts, which encourages students 1300 and up to send scores, might actually be using the lower end scores, give them a reason to deny? No, I really don't. I think Tufts, all right, Seton Hall has a much higher admissions rate than Tufts, but also transparently encourage them to send everything over 1200. They say, if you don't, you'll not be penalized. So I really fundamentally believe that the admissions office at Tufts, even though they're getting their middle 50 of enrolled students is, let's say it's a 1450 to 1520 at Tufts. They are going to use, because again, part of it, what they found is there were kids with a 1300 from lower income schools, underrepresented minorities who were withholding them, but that 1320 would have helped them. And so that was part of the findings of the Opportunity Insights research with Raj Shetty and crew, that so many kids who would have benefited didn't send them. So saying, hey, below this threshold, they've probably done their institutional research that, hey, over 100 is a good enough score for us, even though we're getting scores here, the average enrolled kid, we're not, so many kids below that threshold weren't sending them. They've probably run the numbers to find that, hey, kids with 1370, they're doing fine here. Because it only predicts to a certain point. But I'd rather know you had a 1370 than you had a 1050, because those scores are very different. And so in the grand scheme, their research probably shows that, yeah, over this threshold, this actually does predict strength and performance, even though on average, the kid who's sending test scores is higher. So I don't think they're being disingenuous. I don't think they're trying to trick kids and they really do want those scores. Would it be time enough to prep for August SAT? Absolutely. We have June, we have July. Yes, full stop, no question. We have time for August. Okay. Next question. What are your thoughts on the free materials by Khan Academy? Use them. I would absolutely use them if I was a student prepping this test. Khan Academy is great. The College Board has their, and the thing with Khan Academy, like their research shows, if you do like 20 hours of work using their stuff, kids pick up a good number of points, 90 points. What they're also finding is the vast majority of kids go on Khan Academy and spend about 2 hours and leave. Most of them don't stay with it. They don't, but the kids who are self-directed, self-motivated, you can get some serious points on Khan Academy. And even as, Applerouth students who are prepping with us, paying for a tutor, these are resources. These are problem sets. And the College Board, they've announced they're actually going to be releasing this new thing where you can generate practice problems specifically for you from your tests. So yeah, I would use the College Board stuff and Khan Academy. No question I would. More materials they're beneficial. How quickly do you recommend a student take the SAT after a prep class? Ideally, you finish a prep class within a month of the test. I mean, it's okay if you wait a little bit, but I recommend that within a month of every official SAT AST, take a timed practice test. Even if let's say I do a prep class in June or July, and I'm looking at taking the October test, make sure in September you do a full-time practice and go over it. Don't wait several months of getting cold, because memory stores do get cold and they atrophy and there's attrition, and that's how the brain works. So ideally, you go from a prep class within about a month or so into the test. How many months before should you start studying for ST? I'd say 8-10 weeks is great. At the most, 12 weeks for your first test. And then you keep going for a second test, but it's ultimately 3 months is the furthest. 8-10 weeks is fine. Other good free resources. I mean, the free resources, it's going to be College Board offers their 8 tests. Khan Academy offers the free resources. Other places you can buy their books, McGraw-Hill, Gruber, Princeton Review, Kaplan. I mean, these kind of things. But the free ones, the good free ones are really going to be the official ones. The AST, they have one free test online. But most of them you're going to pay something, but it's marginal. It's $30 for a book or something like that if you want to get more practice. Does Applerouth have free resources? Everyone at Applerouth can take a free practice SAT and a free practice ACT, and we'll score it and give you rich feedback and even talk to you for half an hour about a possible plan. So yeah, that's what we offer people. So yeah, that's a resource that we do. We give a free diagnostic with very thorough feedback. So if I were you, I would take advantage of that. It's a great resource. All right, we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. Anything else you want to know about assessments or testing or preparation, AP exams, whatever it is? I'm very happy to answer questions. We gotcha. Okay. I'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll just say goodnight. It's 2 minutes till 9. So I do want to thank you. We're going to send a recording of this. Oh, here we go. How do our recording? We are recording it. When we finish it, we're going to send it out to people. So you'll get it automatically. Feel free to share it, watch it again. Give it to someone who might enjoy it. How important are the AP scores and admissions? They are a factor. If you have a bunch of 5s and 4s, that demonstrates strength. You saw John Ladding and Emory saying, hey, we are looking more closely at standardized metrics because grades are a bit inflated. So, and the UC, if you're applying to UC system, applying UC Davis, UC Irvine, Berkeley, UCLA, they do not look at test scores like the SAT. They look very, very closely at your 5s and your 4s and your strong 6s and 7s on your IP scores. So yes, they factor in, if you have strong scores, send them. They strengthen the application, no question. They send a message that, yeah, I got an A in the class, and I got a 5, which means I know the content on calculus or US history and so forth. So shouldn't students be told that if you have a hook, like being first year under more challenging circumstances, to send that 1,300? Won't kids not fitting the profile think they should send the score anyways? I'm frustrated. It's very complicated, not very transparent. Thanks for the presentation. I mean, it's interesting how nuanced. They don't want to discourage kids from applying. They want kids to apply. If I have a 1320, I'm unhooked. Yeah, I still take toughs at their word that they're not. Maybe I'm being naive here, But they're trying to obviously bring forth the scores from kids who would have withheld them, could have helped them. But even if you're at a school that the average test score is higher, my sense is data does show that that score is kids who score over that threshold tend to be able to handle the work at Tufts, even if it's not going to be a huge net plus factor. It does also show that you didn't get 1,000, so it does give them information about you and your abilities. Even if it doesn't put you on the super strength, it might say good enough academically on the testing piece, even though it's not a huge net asset in the profile. Are Cambridge scores regarded the same as AP scores? Cambridge scores are, well, I know that the IB scores are counted the same. I'm not as versed with Cambridge in terms of how admissions officers, and it may vary by school because IB, AP, that's universal. But it may vary by, which institutions, certain private ones will look with different, how they scrutinize, how they evaluate the strength of a Cambridge score. All right, y'all, it's 9 o'clock. Thank you so much for attending. There'll be more of these coming, and if feel free to share the deck with people, share the presentation, and I hope everyone has a good night. And if you need any help with any of this stuff, please give us a call, reach out. We're happy to help your kids with this work. All right, guys, have a good night.